In this video, I want to talk to you about the 4 most common injuries we see related to tennis players in clinic, what causes them, and most importantly, how you can prevent them. Don't forget, if you like our content and you want to see more from us and more videos to help with your health and well-being, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so that we can notify you as soon as we launch any new content. The most common injury we probably see in clinic related to tennis is tennis elbow, which I suppose is no surprise. The condition can be so common in tennis players that it even has its own name, in tennis elbow. But what it's actually called is lateral epicondylitis. And what I want to explain to you is why it's called this and what tennis elbow actually is. Now, the lateral epicondyle is the outside of our elbow. It's in this area here. And we also call this the common extensor origin. Now, the reason it's called that is our muscles that create wrist extension sit on the top of our arm here. So these are the muscles that we find on the top of our arm here that bring about wrist extension. Now, all of these muscles come up and attach into the same point, which is on the outside of the elbow here, this lateral epicondyle. So hence we get this condition, lateral epicondylitis. And what that means is if these muscles are creating too much force on this area, we get the pain on the outside of the elbow. And as I say, it's so common in tennis players because they're doing a lot of wrist movement that it often more commonly is known as tennis elbow. So the problem or the pain that we're getting is at the elbow. But remember, when we're rehabbing injury, we always want to be looking above and below the joint to be finding out what's the cause, not just the effect. The effect's at the elbow, but where's the cause? So in this case, the first place we start is in the wrist. And we want to be making sure that these muscles that move the wrist haven't developed any trigger points or haven't got too tight. And what happens is that can typically pull at the elbow. So one of the key things that we want to be doing is some myofascial release of this tissue. So this might be rolling or massage through the area and also stretching the area. One of the common things that I always say to tennis players as well is, have we made sure that the grip is suitable on our racket? Now, what I mean by that is that we want that grip to be as soft as possible. So sometimes just applying a second grip or an over grip to the racket can be very helpful because it prevents us from squeezing too hard on the racket and putting too much force through this area and pulling at the elbow. Another thing to consider is, are the strings of the appropriate strength, or are these a little bit too tight that's causing us to grip a little bit too heavy on that racket? But other things to consider are rolling through the tissue and also stretching of that tissue, holding static stretches for 30 seconds to just be trying to stretch that out. A good thing to do can be to compare the amount of flexion that you have at your wrist from your tennis playing hand to your non-tennis playing hand, and just seeing if there's a difference in there, and that could be an indicator that these muscles are too tight. But don't forget, I mentioned we wanted to look below the joint. We also want to look above the joint. Something that, and in this case, it's at the shoulder. And something that typically happens with tennis players is that they can become quite tight around their shoulder of the tennis playing arm. So some simple tests to carry out are looking at how much internal and external rotation that we've got at the shoulder. To assess this, what we would do is we try to lift our hand up our spine. This is assessing our internal rotation. So as we lift the hand up the spine, and it's worth starting with the non-tennis playing hand first, and then you can change this onto the tennis playing hand. If you find on your tennis playing hand that you can't get that hand as far up your spine, you know that you're reduced in internal rotation, which is a very common problem I see with tennis players. And if we get a problem at the shoulder, that can cause a problem coming downwards. So that can be causing us to be doing too much movement through the elbow, through these muscles at the wrist, but it's actually a problem up at the shoulder. So the other thing we want to check is external rotation at the shoulder. Now, the way we do this is almost the opposite, in that we try to slide our hand down our spine. And again, compare this on the non-tennis playing hand to the tennis playing hand. And there you'll be able to see if there's a restriction at the shoulder that could be causing the problem at the elbow. Condition number 2 is medial epicondylitis. Now, medial epicondylitis can also be called golfer's elbow, but don't be fooled. Just because it has the term golfer's elbow, it doesn't mean that it's not something that happens in tennis. In fact, I personally think that we probably see nearly as much golfer's elbow related to tennis as we do tennis elbow. The reason is that it, again, is a condition caused by problems or somebody using the wrist excessively. So it's just as likely to happen in tennis players as it is golfers. So we were talking before about the tennis elbow being lateral epicondylitis, which is the outside of our elbow. The medial epicondylitis is on the inside of our elbow. And again, like we were talking about the muscles that come up and attach into the lateral epicondylitis that extend our wrists, the muscles that flex our wrists, so the muscles on the front of the arm. So if we imagine this is your front of your forearm now, these muscles that create that movement all come up and attach into the inside of the elbow here. And so that's why if we get a problem with these muscles, they can be pulling at the inside of the elbow. So what we typically see is pain at the inside of the elbow. So that's your medial epicondylitis or golfer's elbow. But our treatments are very similar. What we want to be doing is, are there any differences? So before, when we were looking at if there was any differences in wrist flexion, now what we're looking at is, are there any differences in wrist extension? So what we'd be looking to do here is to be comparing the amount of wrist extension from your tennis playing hand to your non-tennis playing hand. And if there's a difference there, or there's a tightness felt in that wrist flexor area when you go into wrist extension, we know then that we've got some tightness or some problems in these muscles. So again, what we'd be looking to do is do a stretching program or a myofascial release program, with rolling and stretching in that area. But again, the same principles apply that we want to look below, but we also want to look above at the shoulder. So again, the internal and external rotation movements at the shoulder that we discussed when talking about tennis elbow is just as applicable here. One of the next most common injuries we see in clinic related to tennis players is stomach related issues. Now, this is an interesting one because it's not exclusive to tennis, but by far the most common time that we're treating stomach related strains of the stomach complex, which comprises of your rectus abdominis and your obliques. It's by far the most common happening in tennis players. So why is this? Well, when we are playing tennis, we are using that stomach muscles a lot and opening and lengthening those stomach muscles and then contracting them. But the stomach is quite complicated to understand, and actually what again we need to be thinking about is the cause and the effect. So we're getting the problem at the stomach, but it's quite likely that the problems are coming from somewhere else. And I just wanted to explain this with this very poorly drawn diagram here. But we have in our bodies what we call sling systems. Effectively, we're all connected. Our muscles are all connected via connective tissue, which connects everything up. And if we get a problem at one part of the chain, as it were, then or one part of the track, then we can actually have the resulting pain at the other end or further down the line, further down the track, as it were. So your oblique slings are a sling of connective tissue that connects diagonally through our body, and it runs through our stomach here. So what we find a lot of the time with people, for example, is if they get in perhaps stomach problems on the left-hand side and some pain in here, that we find a problem at this right hip. Because if the hip is being perhaps pulled outwards, it's going to pull pressure on this sling and cause the pain to result at the end of that track. If we imagine if we fix an elastic band to the wall, and if we pull at that elastic band as much as we can, we might create some damage. But the damage is likely to be at the point where it's fixed to the wall. But the problem isn't the point where it's fixed to the wall. The problem is the thing that's pulling it. So in this case, if this hip is too tight, for example, and this is just a hypothetical example, but if this hip is too tight, then it could be causing the problem up there. So yes, we want to be treating the stomach issue, but again, what we also want to be doing is addressing the hip. So if you are getting stomach problems, I think a good hip mobility investigation would be helpful. Now, the problem with the hip is that multiple muscles cross it. We have hip flexors, quads, hamstrings, groins, glutes, TFL, all these muscles crossing the hip. So it does take some detailed investigation, but it's very much worth assessing your hip flexibility if we are suffering from stomach issues. Because again, we have a sling of tissue running upwards in our body as well. So if we get a problem down here in the quads or the hip flexors, that may cause the pain in there. So our body is effectively a crisscross formation happening with lots of different layering of tissues. So it's very important that if you are getting stomach strains and frequent stomach strains as a tennis player, that you want to be having a good investigation around that hip to be understanding exactly what might be causing that pain. To help you in assessing your own flexibility, I'm going to link below to another video that we have on our channel which helps you to assess your own flexibility. The fourth most common type of injury that we see related to tennis players are sprains, and most commonly ankle sprains. Now the reason for this is tennis as a sport involves lots of side-to-side movement or sharp movements with changes of direction, which leaves the body more vulnerable to these sprains or these rolling of the ankles, if you like. So what can we do about that? Well, this comes down to what we call our proprioception. Now, proprioception is effectively probably best thought of as balance. But what proprioception is the strength of our ligaments and its communication strengths with the brain to keep us balanced. But what can typically happen if our ankles are weak is that they are much more easy to hit an uneven surface or a change of direction to result in a sprain. So what we do about that? Well, what we want to be doing is strengthening the ankles and improving this process of proprioception the best we can to cope with the demands of tennis with the sudden changes of direction and lunges and things that can put us at risk. So when we're working with somebody in clinic, what we're typically doing is comparing their proprioception. And what you can do is give yourself balance challenges where you're testing out both legs, being in a single leg position and just looking to move your body on top of that single leg to check your strength. So what I would encourage you to do is complete an exercise like the one we're showing you, where you're looking to stand on one leg, test your balance and move the other leg into different directions in order to check how strong you are on that single leg. Compare yourself right to left, try and improve that strength, improve the distance that the other leg can be moving to, and that way you know that you're building up your strength to cope with the demands of tennis playing. And so that covers the 4 most common injuries that we see in tennis players. However, of course there are more injuries that tennis players can suffer with. We just wanted to try and get across some of the key points for you in this video to perhaps help you to prehab and stop these injuries coming if you are a keen tennis player. But let me know your thoughts, comment below, let me know the other injuries that you suffer, and if you need any information from us, please feel free to reach out to us.